Hello viewers, this is David Jonson here from henrythornton.com. I normally update the politics and economics columns on the site, but today I'm starting a new weekly politics blog. And for our first issue, I'd like to look at stimulus packages in America and Australia. And in 5 minutes or so, I'd like to quickly look at each of the bills separately, how they've gone through the legislatures, and finally give my own opinion on each of them. In particular, I'd like to look at some of the weaknesses. So let's start with each of the bills separately. In America, President Obama wants to spend $700 billion US. His plan involves tax cuts and infrastructure spending. More than 40% of the bill is tax cuts, and this will be given to nearly all Americans except the rich, and there's also company tax cuts in there too, especially for small businesses. With the infrastructure spending, he mostly wants to upgrade government buildings to be more environmentally friendly. In Australia, Kevin Rudd wants to spend $42 billion on handouts and infrastructure. He wants to give $950 as handouts to working families, pensioners, and other interest groups, and he also wants to spend the infrastructure money on upgrading schools, and this will cost $16 billion. Now, each of the bills have passed through the lower houses in America and Australia, but they're quite different as they approach the Senate. In America, President Obama easily has the numbers to get his bill through, but he'll want to win some Republican support so he can get it through without the Republicans using time delay tactics. And this is uncertain though, because in the lower house, all Republicans voted against his bill, along with a few rogue Democrats, so it will be interesting to see whether he can get it through unchanged or whether we'll have to make compromises. But in Australia, Kevin Rudd will have to change his bill because he needs the support of either the Greens, Family First, or the Independent. And each of these groups have their own interests, so we can expect the bill to change. There'll be some tinkering to it before it gets through. And each of the bills should get through within the week or very soon after that. So that's just looking at each of the bills and how they've gone through the legislatures. Now I'd like to move on to my own opinion and look at some of the weaknesses that are there with each of the stimulus packages. And I'll start with America's first, because I believe it's significantly better for the main reason that it involves tax cuts. And I think we should applaud tax cuts whenever and wherever they're given, but there are problems with Obama's plans. The main problem is that he wants to give tax cuts to all Americans, but he wants to reverse tax cuts for the rich, forcing them to shoulder more of America's spending and more of its debt. And it's a bad thing because the main lesson we've learned from Thatcher and Reagan and the past 20 years of economic growth is that small tax cuts across the board are best, and that governments do not spend money anywhere near as well as individuals. And we don't want to see a return to the Keynesian days where the rich pay extremely high taxes to pay for government spending that ultimately doesn't drive the economy. And with this current recession, it will be individuals and companies bring us out of it, not government spending to interest groups or pork barrelling voters. So that's the main problem I see with it. Now moving on to Australia, and I think there are several problems. Firstly, let's look at the handouts. I think the handouts are a bad idea because it's following the failure in October last year where Kevin Rudd spent $12 billion on handouts before Christmas. And this spending didn't give any real shock to the Australian economy. Retail sales rose for Christmas, but this isn't going to bring us out of a recession, or it's not going to really mitigate it much. The handouts are only a temporary hit. They aren't permanent like tax cuts, and they're not going to bring us out of an economy. And it also gives government greater control over redistributing wealth, and it's something we don't want to see because people spend their own money best, and we don't want to see governments taking money from others and giving it to people who haven't earned it in the first place. The second problem with the Australian one is that the infrastructure spending is being very poorly spent. $16 billion is going to be spent on upgrading schools, which it's a failure because Labor governments, state Labor governments, have done this by neglecting schools. It's not up to the federal government to come in there and spend money upgrading buildings, because this isn't going to bring us out of recession either, and it's not going to help us in the future. What we need is visionary spending on things like roads, railways, power plants, water pipelines, things like this that'll help us in the long term. And the final point I'd make, that it's a shared weakness between the two, is that this spending is going to put both countries massively into debt. In America, government debt will account for 10% or so of GDP, and in Australia we're going to face a budget deficit of $50 billion next year, and it will mount up into the hundreds of billions of dollars. This spending is going to have to be paid back at some time, and it will be future generations like my own and later ones that will have to pay for this, for these costly stimulus packages. And the evidence doesn't always show that stimulus packages are a good thing. Indeed, throughout the Depression, FDR spent massive amounts of money, but it didn't really drag America out of depression. It was only World War II that did that. So we need to bear that in mind, that not always stimulus packages are a good thing. So they're my main problems with the stimulus packages, and I'd be interested to hear what you have to say too. So if you'd like to email me at henrythornton.com, you can find my email on the site there. Now, I hope you've enjoyed my first politics blog, and I look forward to giving more in the future. So thank you for your time, and I'll see you next time.